After the events of the Thousand-Year Blood War arc, the world of Bleach is plunged into what came to be known as the Great Soul King Protection War, a war fought within the shadows to determine if the truth of Soul Society's sins were to be released to the public or kept in the dark embers of history. After Yuha is defeated by Ichigo, Ichibei is on cleanup duty, and while he's there, he's approached by Shinsui Kyoraku, who came to lay eyes on the linchpin that is the Soul King, at least what's left of him. During their conversation, it is evident that Ichibei had an underlying backup plan, which was to use Ichigo as a Soul King if matters escalated to that point. Luckily, because Yuha absorbed the Soul King unto himself, Yuha could then be used as a stand-in for the original Soul King, relieving Ichigo of that very terrible fate. As the two leaders converse, Grimmjow and the other Arrancar make their way into the Inner Holy Shrine, having retrieved Harrybell, who now lays her eyes on the being that Aizen wanted to ascend to, and the one to whom all of this is about, the Soul King. There's a lot of tension in the air, but the balance of souls is so fragile right now that no one can afford to lose any more comrades, and they both elect to go their separate ways. Ichibei goes on to revive Nimaya Uetsu and the other Squad Zero members, and once they reawaken, we learn that while Nimaya was dead, someone came up to his palace and stole a very specific Zanpakuto called Ikomikidomo. Who, how, and why are yet to be seen, but someone is intent on using the vulnerability of the Sweepers to their benefit. It's going to be very interesting to see how that unfolds. Back in Soul Society, Aizen is being placed back into Muken, but as he's being transported, Hisagi, who never quite got to confront Aizen about deceiving Tosen, makes his way to Muken and speaks to Aizen. Aizen just does his Aizen things and toys with Hisagi's emotions, but ultimately, he tells him that what he did, killing Kaname Tosen, as Kaname was beginning to realize the error of his ways, was an act of mercy, not punishment. That was Aizen's way of keeping Kaname from succumbing to the despair that he would have felt if he had survived after abandoning his purpose. And really, what Aizen means in that instance is that Kaname obviously felt very strongly about what he wanted to do and the world he wanted to change, and he placed everything on the line to make that dream a reality. He killed innocents and did a lot of terrible things, all in the name of achieving his goal. If he had survived, there was no way he was going to be allowed to just be free. He was going to be put in prison, and while in prison, he would have had to face the fact that he abandoned his principles to do something terrible and affected a lot of people, and then seemingly changed his mind again. That state, being locked up in a cell, having to face the music of knowing that you made the wrong choice, would have sent him into despair. And Aizen, he did not want to see Kaname's pure emotions become muddled by the despair he would have felt once he survived and had to deal with the consequence of his actions. And so from Aizen's perspective, killing him was mercy. We then go into flashback and find a young Tosen at the doors of Central 46. While he's pleading his case, a different man approaches Tosen and speaks to him. We learn that Kaki was killed by her husband, but because her husband is one of the members of the 5 noble families, Central 46 refuses to charge him with murder. Kaname doesn't know why the Shinigami would let this injustice stand and is trying to make things right. The man then asks Tosen if he's going to go down the path of vengeance, and Tosen, after thinking about Kakyo's wishes, elects not to be vengeful. It's at this point that the man reveals his true identity. The man who's speaking to Kaname right now is known as Tokinada Tsunayashiro, Kakyo's husband and the one who killed her. This guy is the culprit. He beats down Tosen and crushes his throat, after which he asks his guard to throw Tosen out. Brutal. As we exit from the flashback, we find that Tokinada was just having a dream about the past. He wakes up surrounded by the dead bodies of the stealth squad, and a young androgynous boy walks up to him. We find that this individual's name is Hikone, and this Hikone seems to have a very good relationship with Tokinada, and Tokinada insists that they interact on a first name basis. We then switch gears and follow Shuei Hisagi, who is the editor-in-chief of the Serite Bulletin. Think of that as the new systems for the Serite. He's following a story and heads to the Rukon district to speak to Kakushiba. He was hoping that she would tell him information about what really happened during the war, but she just directs him to Ganju, who actually went with Ichigo and the others to the Soul King's palace. As he heads out of the house to go find Ganju, he comes to find that Ginjo Kugo and Tsukishima, who are staying with Kukaku, are standing next to his motorcycle, wondering what a bike is doing here in the Soul Society. The three have a conversation, and it's evident that there is some strong tension between all of them. The tension continues to escalate until Ganju comes in to defuse the situation. Shuhei doesn't like Ginjo because Ginjo betrayed Ukitake, and Ginjo doesn't like Hisagi because he thinks Hisagi is extremely ignorant and oblivious to the truth. The scene then switches again to the Squad 1 barracks where Shinsui is having a conversation with Nanao. He tells her that he was approached by Central 46 about the assassination attempt on Tokinada, and there is seemingly something he must do. So he orders that Kensei Muguruma and Shuhei Hisagi be brought to him. Back at Kukaku's house, Ganju is telling Shuhei about all that happened in the Soul King's palace, but Shuhei is more interested right now in Ginjo Kugo and why he betrayed Ukitake. At first, Ginjo doesn't really want to talk about it, but he ultimately decides to speak, and he recounts the events of the Fullbringer arc, ending his story by revealing that a lot of his Fullbringer friends were killed by Shinigami, and that is what prompted his betrayal. He wanted to ask Jushiro about it personally to see if he had anything to do with it, but Jushiro died before Ginjo ever got the chance. Their conversation is then interrupted by a call from Shinsui for Hisagi, who goes back to the Serete. Here, we learn that Shinsui wants Shuhei to publish an exclusive story about Tokinada ascending to the role of the head of the Tsunayashira family. When he hears that name, he's shocked because Tosin must have told him the name of the one who murdered Kakyo. This muddles the waters, and Shuhei isn't really comfortable publishing a story about a murderer who killed Kaname's longtime friend, but Shinsui orders him to do so and he has to obey his orders. We then switch over yet again, and at this point, Naruto is just switching over from place to place, establishing what's considered, quote, normal or what's happening in all these different locations in the world of Bleach. So now, we're going to the 4th squad, and we find that Hanataro Yamada is visited by his older brother, Seinosuke Yamada, who is a retired Shinigami now acting as a medic for the nobles. He comes with a word of caution. He wants Hanataro to take some time off work because he believes something terrible is on the way. We continue to jump around, and now we're in Karakura Town, and Ichigo's friends are attacked by a hollow. They manage to put up a good fight against the hollow, but are ultimately saved by Shino Madarame. Now, Shino Madarame is that one girl of the Sword of the Thousand Year Blood War arc who was with Shino Ryunosuke at the beginning of the arc. Like, those two no-name Shinigami, that's who Shino is. She's related to Ikaku. As they're talking to each other, they're interrupted by this cult group of people. After all the craziness happening in Karakura Town over the years, a cult was created, believing in some kind of higher existence and higher power. And the one at the head of this organization is a beautiful lady we come to know as Ora Michibane, the representative of the Execution Religious Corporation. She meets up with Yukio and wishes to have a conversation. Okay, so at this point, Naruto takes us into Wakemundo to update us on the things happening over there. Essentially, Giselle, Lil Toto, and Bambietta are engaged in battle against Rudeborn Chalute. We find that the Quincy have lost their ability to perform Volstandish, except Uri apparently, who maybe even kept his shrift and his Volstandish. Volstandish? It's all hard to say that name. Volstandig? I think it's pronounced Volstandish. It's what somebody told me in the chat one time, so I'll say that. Volstandish. We learned that Jurgrim foresaw the possibility of the Quincy's losing while he had the Almighty, and created a safe house of sorts to ensure the survival of the Quincy race. As the battle continues, we learn that when Lil Toto eats something using her powers of the gluttony, she gains the powers of those she devours. She eats one of the tentacles of Loli, who had transformed, and she, along with her comrades, are about to engage in battle when Grimjow, Nail, and Haribel arrive. Soon after they arrive, another Garganta opens and yet another figure walks through. This is the child who was with Tokinada before, going by the name Hikone. Hikone is here in Tokinada's orders and proclaims that they are to be the new king of Wakemundo. Obviously, everyone there objects, but Hikone reveals his Zanpakuto Shikai called Ikomikidomo. So we don't know how, but whatever Zanpakuto Nimaya had called Ikomikidomo, Hikone is the one who has it now. We cut away from there and head back to the Soul Society, where Shuhei approaches Shinsui and inquires about the history between Ukitake and Ginjo. Shinsui says even he doesn't know everything, because Jushiro kept his own secrets, but he promises Shuhei that he'll learn everything he can and tell Shuhei when the time comes. Shuhei continues to investigate on his own, talking to Ikaku, Yumichika, learning little bits of information as he goes. In the meantime, Shinsui, who is in his office, is approached by Tokinada. Tokinada wants Shinsui to reach out to Yoruichi Shihoin and Byakuya Kyuuchi to have a peace treaty meeting. Shinsui doesn't have a qualm about that and he agrees, but as Tokinada is leaving, he taunts Shinsui about Ukitake's death, but Shinsui isn't fazed. He then throws a few verbal jabs about how every other clan head that didn't like him is dead, and yet again, Shinsui isn't fazed, he maintains frame. But then, he makes a comment about Nanao's mother and how he would have made her execution even more of a spectacle, and that gets Shinsui agitated. He releases his spiritual pressure and Tokinada immediately backs away, understanding that he would not survive in the battle against Shinsui, at least not yet. Meanwhile, Hisagi, who is led by Hanataro, make their way to the Central Pharmaceutical Institution, which is a specific medical facility for the nobles, and Hanataro and Hisagi are aboard by the extravagant luxury of the entire place. As they are there, a child appears and stumbles onto the ground, wounded. Seinosuke, Hanataro's older brother, appears on the scene and heals Hikone, who is seemingly beaten back from Wakamundo. Hisagi learns that Hikone is a retainer to Tokinada, and Seinosuke once again warns Hanataro to take time off and advises Shuhei to look the other way. The questions begin to pile up, and the story continues to unfold. Back in Wakamundo, and quite frankly at this point, I'm like, Narita, you've got to keep things more condensed. We're just jumping all over the place. It's insane. The pacing is just all over the place. But anyway, back in Wakamundo, we learned that all three Espada, including the Quincy that were present, had to fight together in order to push Hikone back. But then Haribel says something really, really weird. She compares Hikone's power to Toshiro Hitsugaya during the time they fought in Karakura Town. And I don't like that, because it messes up the power scaling of Bleach here. Now, in the larger scheme of things, it's ultimately inconsequential, but likening Hikone now to fake Karakura Town Hitsugaya, and then saying that Quincy's Arankars, including three Espada, had to work together to barely push him back, I don't know about that. That's just messy. I don't like that. Back in the Rukon district, Ginjo is walking around when he hears people screaming about being correct about the afterlife. He motions to ignore it, but he's drawn to it when he hears the name of the religion they follow, something called execution. Back in Tokinada's home estate, he's about to leave for the meeting he has with Byakuya and Yoruichi when he's attacked yet again by assassins. This time, Hikone isn't present, but it's okay, because Tokinada resorts to using his new Zanpakuto, called Kuten Kyokoku. We don't actually see the fight happen, but it's implied that he defeated all the assassins because he made it to the meeting safely. When we next see him, he's seated around the table with Byakuya and Yoruichi. There's some unfriendly banter between the three of them, but eventually, they get to the point. Tokinada's goal here is to restore the noble houses, beginning with reinstating the Shiba clan as a noble house. Yoruichi tells him that Isshin willingly chose exile, and Ichigo and the others aren't interested in status, but Tokinada wants to have Ichigo's sisters, Yuzu and Karin, be the acting heads. This puts Yoruichi on edge, and Tokinada continues to elaborate. He believes that if the noble heads are reinstated, they could have a power even greater than Central 46. He draws their attention to the unusual way the Shiba clan was stripped of its noble status. Byakuya notes that the only way the Shiba clan could have lost their status was if the order came from the Soul King. But, being that the Soul King is unable to do such a thing, because he's just a figurehead balancer and not a being with acting and speaking will, he wants the five families to become the rulers of all the worlds. He wants to replace the Soul King with someone who has will and agency. It's kinda implied that Byakuya and Yoruichi don't actually know the full extent of the Soul King's secret, but Tokinada tells them that Kisuke Urahara knows, and of course he does. In the final scene of this volume, Shuhei leaves the world of the living, and we get a flashback to Tosen, who is being beaten back by the guards. Suddenly, the guards turn on themselves, and Tosen is approached by none other than Sosuke Aizen himself, who calls himself a mere Shinigami. And that is where we will end on part 1 of my Can't Fear Your Own World analysis. This first volume does a lot to show you the aftermath of the war, and it sets the stage for the questions and answers we're about to get. I will admit though, Narita's writing is so obviously not Kubo's, and it's hard for me to read Bleach that isn't Kubo. Nonetheless, it's still at the very least entertaining, and I'm interested to know where this goes. If you enjoyed this video and you've liked this content, please don't hesitate to like, comment, most of all, subscribe. Until the next one, this is your boy, signing out. Peace.